Every year, I give a presentation here at the Peoria Church, which I call the State of the Church. It's a time to bring awareness to our members of what's going on in the world church among the 20+ million Adventists. And this year, I'm going to do it on video so you can see it too. Let's go. Let me start by backing up a little bit. Each year, the Executive Committee of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists has a meeting called Annual Council, and they do a bunch of business, bureaucratic stuff, and part of that business is to share reports on membership trends and on giving and finances, and to allow the various departments to share what's been going on in the various departments. Then, the North American Division follows a few weeks later with their own reports at NAD year-end meeting. Now, I've watched all of this, so you don't have to. And here are some of the highlights coming out of both of those meetings. The first thing we like to learn from Annual Council, like the bottom line, is how many people are Seventh-day Adventists? How has that changed in the last year or last 5 years? Now, David Trim, the director of the Office of Archive Statistics and research, told us that we have 21.6 million members around the world as of June 2020. So that means some 800,000 people entered the church between June 2019 and June 2020, which is about 66,666 people every month. 666.
Intruder.
Now, it's a big number, needs to be put in perspective. Trim also told us that the total number of people entering the Adventist church hasn't been less than 1 million since 2004. For instance, we brought in 1.3 million people each year from 2016 through 2019, and so 2020 witnessed 500,000 fewer people joining the church than in the most recent years. I think we can say that that's largely the effect of COVID on the church. Now, adding 800,000 people to our church still sounds like a lot, even if it's not quite as high as 1.3 million. But there's another side to that coin, and that's how many people we are losing. We gained 800,000 people, but we lost 560,000, which is par for the course for the past 5 years. Now, COVID, it seems, prevented people from joining the church as they used to do, but it did not prevent people from walking away from the church. Now, if you feel like bringing 800,000 people in the front door while watching 500,000 people walk out the back door is a bit unsettling, you're not alone. Dr. Trim reported that since 1965, 41 million people have joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. 41 million! Of those 41 million, nearly 17 million have left the church, meaning that 2 out of every 5 members leave. So if you need help visualizing this, go stand in front of your church next Sabbath. Just group all the people who are sitting there in groups of 5, and just imagine 2 of those 5 in each group will leave at some point. Now, of course, this number really depends on where you are. In the North American Division and the NAD, we're actually lose closer to 6.7 out of every 10 members who join the church, depending again on where you live. And yet this is lower than what the Inter-American Division and South American Division are experiencing. Now, there could be a lot of explanations for this, of course, including what we call cleaning up the books. Every church has many more members on their books than actually show up on any given Sabbath. And periodically, churches will get rid of a couple hundred people who have not functioned as members for decades. So maybe they joined the church and then they moved away, or, they died, or they just walked away from church, and they're still members in our church though, right? They're still on the books. And so, whatever the attrition rate is, whatever the actual attrition rate is, some of this may be due to the fact that churches are cleaning up books. It's concerning. Now, Adventism is not unique here. A lot of denominations are wrestling with a similar attrition rate. Southern Baptists reported earlier this year that they only baptized 120,000 people in 2020, which is the lowest number for them in over 100 years. And they also reported that they've lost about 2 million members over the past 15 years. Yeah. The United Methodists, too, are down about 18%. The fact of the matter is that many churches are facing either slower growth or real decline. So we should be grateful for any kind of growth, especially during COVID. Now, these numbers also tell us that if churches could just focus on member care, they could help close that back door, and then they would grow faster. Now, people leave for a variety of reasons. It's not always something that can be helped. But it is critical that church members don't make unforced errors and end up pushing people away by saying something unkind or whatever it may be. All right, listen very carefully. There are two ways to help your church grow. Healthy people need to step up, and toxic people need to shut up. If you can have the healthy people, get involved, start doing things that will help you grow, and if you can have the people who end up chasing other people away to just be quiet, that would be great as well. Now, another really interesting thing we learned from annual council is that the NAD has the lowest Sabbath school attendance rate in the world. Yeah, less than 10% of church members in the North American division attend Sabbath school. I assume they mean adult Sabbath school. Why don't people want to go to Sabbath school? Now, I've done a couple of videos about that, but I still found this really surprising. Okay, I can't speak for the kids and what goes on in the lower divisions, but the adult Sabbath school is in an absolute crisis in North America. Fewer than 10% of your members even attend. Every Sabbath school superintendent and church board should be having a conversation about how to save Sabbath school. And I think just sometimes we've just gotten used to it. We shouldn't get used to 6% of your members showing up. Now, moving over to money, the tithe was up 5%, offerings were up 14% in 2020. And that's pretty good. North America comprises 5% of the global membership, but we give 49% of all the tithe in this denomination. Now, this, we're told, is dropping to 46% in 2022 as part of what they call the tithe parity plan, wherein the NAD stops paying a larger share than everyone else. Now, in 2022, the NAD will be giving 46%, as I mentioned. This will be followed by the Inter-American division at 14%, and then the South American division at 13% of total tithe. So all told, the Americas will generate 73% of all tithe for the world church in 2022. So while we're a global church, it's really just one region in the world that is financially fueling the entire church. And as the rest of the church and the rest of the world begins to grow, hopefully that will even out a little bit more. Now, this is really interesting to me because there are 14 million Southern Baptists and 21 million Seventh-day Adventists in the world, and yet the Southern Baptist Convention brings in about $12 billion a year in revenue, while Adventists bring in about $2 billion in tithe. Now, there are 33% more Adventists than Southern Baptists, yet we bring in 18% of the income which the Southern Baptists bring in, which is just, it's crazy. But I get it. I get it. You're just raising your hand, ooh, ooh, ooh. Matthew, apples and oranges here. Our financial structures are completely different. And it's true. Adventists separate tithes and offerings. A lot of those offerings remain in the local church or get sent to some ministry somewhere, and they don't really get counted. And I get that. But I think this is also speaking to the advantage the SBC has in having most of their members in America where people have a higher standard of living. But the downside of having almost all of your members in America is that as America goes, so goes your church. Adventism is in the top tier of the most diversified memberships of any religious group. Like your financial portfolio, guru will tell you diversity is good. And so while we may not be bringing in the money the SBC is, neither are we bleeding members like they are. Annual Council is not all about numbers and statistics. It's also a place for stories. And the most dramatic story came from Adventist World Radio's report that a rebel group in the Philippines heard one of their broadcasts and surrendered as a group in order to be baptized.
I have video clips. Oh my goodness, it's just amazing. As a young military lady hands the amnesty to a young assassin, former rebel, and they cry and hug each other. Can you imagine the history that's gone on? Here they are asking for forgiveness, receiving amnesty. My son, who's a district attorney, and he said, "Dad, are you sure? Governments in the world, they don't give amnesties to assassins." There they are. You see the military in the Philippines is so sick and tired of what's happening for 50 years. 40,000 people have died. What bullets couldn't do, God has done. Wow, by His word, by broadcasting AWR broadcasts all up in the mountains. That is a total member involvement project.
It took a radio broadcast to accomplish that. That's pretty cool. Now, moving over to the NAD at their year-end meeting, we learned that we have 1.26 million members in North America, about a quarter of whom are in the southern United States. Now, of course, you've got to keep in mind that this is members on the book, not necessarily members who are attending. So that means there's about 300,000 members on the books in the American South. Now, as far as membership growth is concerned, about 14,000 were added in 2020, which is about half that of 2019. Of course, that's COVID for you. If we added 14K, we also only lost about 3,600 members, which is a loss of about, a quarter of our gains. Take all this with a grain of salt, because we honestly don't know how good our record keeping has been during COVID. Many churches have remained closed or are open on a limited basis, and we just won't have a full picture of who is coming back to church until next year. Well, we hope. A point of concern in these numbers is that only 20% of our baptisms in North America are of people who are under 30. Adventists in North America remain 10 years older than the median American. So the median Adventist is 48 years old, while the median American is 38 years old. Now, 10 years may not sound like a lot, but it can be the difference between a single person out of college and a married couple with 3 kids in school. That's a huge life gap. Now, maybe you're still sitting there thinking 10 years isn't too big of a deal, but what that statistic isn't telling you is where this gap is located. Smaller rural churches, of which there are many of them in North America, tend to have a much wider age gap. You just might be a part of a church that wishes that age gap was only 10 years. This is something we need to work on by attracting more and more younger people. It's not news, is it? We've known that for a long time. Now, there were 2 big headlines going around social media coming from the NAD president's report. The first was when he reported that 40% of all church administrators were of retirement age. Yeah, and within the next 5 years, this jumps to 61%, including nearly 80% of all division, union, and conference presidents eligible for retirement. As for pastors, 50% of them will be eligible for retirement in 3 years, and this is startling because we cannot afford to replace all these people, nor do we have enough pastors in the educational pipeline to replace them. So it's a financial problem and a manpower problem. This suggests that we are about to witness large changes in the Adventist churches, as a large number of employees retire in the coming decade and younger workers are suddenly having to take their places. Districts are going to get larger and pastors are going to have more and more churches and they're going to be thrust into positions they didn't expect to be in. It's going to be fun. Churches need to be preparing by becoming less pastor-dependent and getting healthier now. Now, the other big headline coming out of year-end meeting was this Gallup survey trying to figure out what people's perception is of Seventh-day Adventists. Now, we need to take this with a grain of salt because we don't have a lot of the survey data yet, including what questions were asked and who was asked and all that kind of stuff. But the preliminary results are not good. When random people were asked to rank different religious groups in terms of how favorably they perceived them, Adventists averaged 13th place. Oh, out of 100? No. Out of 17. A full 68% of those surveyed said they were not familiar with Adventists, and 80% said they don't know a Seventh-day Adventist personally. Now, when asked how they felt about Adventists, about 50% of respondents said they had no opinion about Adventists, at least not one they were willing to share. Of those who were willing to share their opinion, 34% said they had a somewhat unfavorable or very unfavorable view of Adventists, while only 8% had a positive view. The only groups ranked behind Adventists were Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, and Scientologists. That's right, Muslims and atheists were seen more positively than Adventists. Now, for those familiar with Adventists, they were asked to name some words that they associated with Adventists. And of course, the number one word that people associate with Adventists is Christ-like. I'm kidding, it's Sabbath. But there were also some other words that they associated with Adventists, like Jesus, cult, vegetarian, Ellen White, and restrictive. All those words were mentioned as well. Again, be cautious about drawing too many hard conclusions from this until we know more details about this survey, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But it's troubling Why do 2 out of 3 people apparently not know anything about us? And for those who do, why don't they like us? Are we not likable people? Now, the NED also expressed a desire to train and equip 10,000 digital missionaries, which I am all on board for, my friend. They've also recommitted themselves to working in the major cities of North America, like the Bay Area, where there's 1,000 people for every Adventist, which is just atrocious. And, this has been a trend with the NAD and with the GC for some time, and we're going to keep following this development. It's a good idea. We'll see what happens with it. Finally, there was some news coming out of Canada about some local churches who coped with COVID by planting community gardens. One church provided the seeds and space, and anyone in the community could just come plant and tend to their garden and enjoy their produce. It was so popular that this church had a wait list of people who wanted a raised bed for themselves. They wanted a spot in this garden. That's an awesome ministry. It's a good use of church property, because a lot of these properties tend to have a lot of grassy area that just gets mowed, and that's it. Speaking of that's it for this year's State of the Church report. I hope this briefing helps you remember that you are a member not only of a local church, but of this great big worldwide movement where there's people everywhere. It always amazes me when I realize that my Adventist experience, which is largely shaped by North America, is only 5% of the world church. But if you're still bothered by that Gallup poll, good, let it bother you. Don't just dismiss it by writing off everyone who answered this survey as if they're they have it out for us or something like that. This is a real thing that we have to deal with. So go out there and just don't be a jerk. If you do happen to be a jerk to someone today, just tell them that you are a Scientologist. I'm just kidding. I really am, okay? This has been your annual State of the Church report. Go with grace today, remembering that the best is yet to come.